So we're in lesson number 10, never to resume my labors. And so we are at towards these last few sessions, kind of at a more frenetic pace, getting to the resolution. And so this has taken a shift, right, from the second book, the second volume, which focused largely on the creature's experience, how he came to understanding, how he came really to, although he was physically alive, how he became alive in his thinking, in cultural understandings of things, of relationships. And so we were left with this question last week: should Victor create the monster? And so before we answer that, and we can certainly, I want you to take a position in your mind right now and in your heart right now. I want you to take a side. And so whatever side you feel most confident about, that's the side I want you to take. Because it will serve us much better, I think, for us to really try to come to an understanding of why. Why would we side more there? I don't think any of us is 100% right, equally in the middle, split down. I think that's an easy way to get out of the emotional work of actually challenging ourselves to come to an understanding of something. It's lazy, really, is what it is. Sitting on the fence and not picking a side when we're having a question like that really removes us from the struggle that is intended to be there. And the first thing we want to talk about is actions. And what do actions lead to? Consequences. What are consequences?
Things that happen because of what you do.
Mm-hmm. Things that happen based on what you do, right? And so when we have good actions, what are the consequences? Good results, yeah. I mean, the easiest thing for us to think in terms of that, like how many of you knew consequences are positive? Yeah, positive consequences. A good example of that is for those of you who work. If you go to work and you work hard and you work diligent and you do the work, what do you get as a result?
Money.
You get paid. That's certainly a consequence of putting in work. But let's play that out. You may get money if you do bad work, but what other consequence will you get if you do bad work?
Fired.
You could get fired. Yeah. And so is it safe to say, if the consequence I want in this sense, right, for work, if the consequence I want is to be paid well, would it not make sense that then I would consider my actions as being always doing more than is expected of me so that I can experience a good return on that investment, right? Like if I wanted a raise, I could ask for a raise, or I could demonstrate a cultural understanding of the job in such a way that I exceed the expectations that are given to me, right? And so we are responsible always for what? Our actions. There's not a person in here that has any difficulty in taking ownership. We've talked about this a little bit before, right? And yet what we see in the life of Victor time and time and time again is kind of this like, he knows what he did and he knows he's kind of to blame, but he never, ever, ever fully takes responsibility. But what he sees very, very clearly, increasingly, in the life of the monster is there are consequences to the actions. Up until the point where the monster is saying, either you do this for me, or I will desolate. I will annihilate your world. I will be the wrathful, vengeful, hate-filled demon you already think that I am. And this is the options that he's presented with. And again, really intentional here on the author's part to offer us this idea of actions versus consequences. For those who are in the Bible study this morning, we talked about a biblical principle of the same thing called sowing and reaping. What we sow, we reap, right? There's always a return on our investment, always. What I put into something, I will get out of something. Think of it in terms of even how we meet and gather together educationally, right? The the spirit, the attitude, the mindset, the diligence, all of those things that you bring to here will determine what you get. Now, it won't be because I'm a skilled teacher that you get something. And hopefully I'm a skilled teacher. But that will not determine your ability to learn. Because ultimately, you have to have postured yourself, right? You have had to take some action in the way that you perceive things in your mind, in your heart, to even prepare to receive anything. And what those actions look like, we've stressed this really clearly, is eyes that are looking, notes maybe that are being taken, ears that are really opened up to, the thoughts that are being wrestled with. This is where the journaling comes in handy. But we have to consider that the actions that we take in any form or fashion will result in real life consequences. And all the more so when we're talking about things that go beyond the physical realm. Because what you and I increasingly are understanding is that we do not wrestle, the Bible says, against flesh and blood. So part of the interaction that's taking place here between Victor on one side and the creature on the other is not merely a physical struggle. And really that's where this question, should we create, or should he create the female creature, should come into place is what is the deeper perspective here? It's what's known as an ethical dilemma. I feel like I'm spelling that wrong. I am spelling that wrong. So we're left with an ethical dilemma, right? This real kind of question that we wrestle with. Like, what is really right here? And the way that it's presented, though, is it doesn't feel like we can come to a solid answer. Black and white, light and dark. Like, the answer to this feels nuanced. Like there's a shade of gray here. And so really quickly, just by a show of hands, how many of us would say, yes, Victor should create a female companion for the creature? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many say no? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're pretty much split. Why? Without over-explaining it, why should he create? Why should he? Yeah.
I feel like no matter if there's 2 monsters or 1, there's still going to be desolation. But having 2 monsters, making Frankenstein have someone to confide with, I feel like it's the only chance that Victor has to not have desolation, because 1 monster is still going to do anything it wants. It's superhuman. So I feel like it's worth the risk. Okay. So in your assessment, desolation is going to come regardless of what happens, but you're going to offset the chance of the creature having a bride will help Victor at least maybe avoid or the culture avoid. So the bride may make the monster decide that it wants to live peacefully with its bride. Okay. Yeah. Instead of it creating desolation. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So having a bride, you think, will assuage, tame down kind of the more violent parts of the character of the creature. It's the only chance they have. Right. It's okay. That's a good way to say it. The only chance. Give me
I have another reason. Victor already promised to make the creature. So I feel like it would be a good idea to fulfill his promise, and he didn't. Yeah. And he ended up destroying it because his doubts overcame and then saw the creature and got terrified. Anyway, he already made the promise. Yeah. So that's why is that significant? Right? Him making a promise to the creature is so significant because what is that promise doing for the creature? The creature is finally realizing what? He's finally receiving something that he wants from Victor. And so this promise, right? And let's be really clear. The things that we promise, right? The actions that we take,
if we're not willing to follow through with them, we must understand that, will the consequences be worse? Probably, right? To break a promise only exacerbates the problem, right? It makes it like way worse, because it's almost like you've failed me again. You said you wouldn't, but you failed me again. Andy, you had something you wanted to...
For the against.
Oh, you're going to do the against? Okay, yeah, so we'll still stick with the 4. Yeah.
I think he should because, first off, I think we talked about this a little bit ago. It's not good for man to be alone,
Mm-hmm.
and also that when you're alone, you can kind of let your. I don't think Frankenstein would think. The monster would think the same things as a human does, but you're kind of just trapped in your own mind and wanting to get out there and attack people. And I feel like if the monster had someone, then he would calm down and probably set his mind to something else.
Good. Yeah. So it's not good for man to be alone, and so by providing some companionship, that would again help the monster. Yeah. Did you have?
No.
Okay. So let's go on the opposite side then. Who is the against? We'll go Caden, Emma, Andy, and Liam.
Making the monster in the first place would have been defying God and what his standard was. Obviously, a good example is the Tower of Babel. So, in an effort to make it right, my first answer would be ask the Lord, but that wasn't really an option. So my answer would be not to make it, but instead of making the monster a friend, is trying to either give the monster what I had taken away from it, which is relationship, in a different way with me, or trying to bring it into some context of relationship with the rest of man without it being shunned.
Good. Emma.
If he did create the other one, what if they didn't like each other, the monsters, and then they just started fighting and one of them dies?
Yeah.
It's the same thing as not creating.
Yeah.
It just makes it worse.
What happens if the create the female and they reject one another? They dislike one another. There's enmity between them, right? There's no guarantee that they're going to live in harmony.
Yeah.
And so we're taking a big risk to think that just because they're the same, they're going to be able to connect the same. Yeah, good insight. Andy.
I felt like it kind of came into my mind when we were reading about when he came to that final decision to tear up the new creature. It's like this guy is like totally unstable, and he has been from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Something's wrong here in this guy's. He just needs to stop doing things. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Just gotta stop making more problems. He's already allowed for things to get really bad with the creature, and that was all his fault. So he needs to come out and say, I created this creature and it's destroying, it's gonna be destroying things, and we need to go hunt it down and kill it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can,
Yeah.
It's my fault.
Yeah. So he needs to take the step of not only not creating a companion, he needs to take ownership, tell everyone, and then removing the creature from the world because that's his mistake.
Yeah.
So like nullifying it completely. Good. Liam.
My reason to know is because you then open up a world of, you can basically go through the entire book again with the other monster, and also, you know how the monster really didn't want to be created in the first place. It hated itself. And what if the companion that you created for the monster also hates itself as well? And then that thing brings desolation. And you just have a repeating little scheme going on, and it gets to the point where it's unnecessary. And I would rather have one thing desolating the world than two things desolating the world.
So in that understanding, right, what I heard an echo of is there's a saying, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And so if we assume that the first thing was wrong, why would we create something second would be right? Because you're compounding the problem. Yes, sir.
I also just thought, what if the female monster doesn't like the male monster? So then he asks Victor to create another male monster, and that starts.
We can start creating monsters all day long, right? Well, now we have to create this kind of monster to maybe fix that problem. Yeah.
Is it okay if I share why I would make it?
Yeah, absolutely.
My reasoning behind I would make the monster is, like, with all the, like, what if she doesn't like him, whatever. My notes was, if he makes the female, she will also be rejected by her father. But like the male creature, she would not be alone, left with her, no one like her, and just herself. She would have someone that is alike to her, and, I mean, they both probably wouldn't like Victor, but I think with having each other, it would resolve a lot more than just having one who hates himself and is just out to get Victor, especially because he promised him a female.
Good. Yeah, go ahead.
I just had one more thing. So this is why I'm kind of in mixed thoughts of whether or not to do it, but I'm on more of the other side. I think the only solution to if he does make a female monster is that he's gonna have to fess up to his actions, because everyone is gonna be like, how did another monster get here? And then Victor is gonna be in trouble. I think the only way that that's possible is to.
Good. Yeah, it's tricky, right? And so really what we're asking ourselves here to consider is this biblical principle, counting the cost. In the Gospel of Luke 14, I'll read 28 and 29. It's talking here, biblically, Jesus is talking about the cost of actually being a disciple, of being one who follows Jesus. I think we can flesh this out a little bit more so. And so I'm going to say this scripture twofold. First of all, to reflect upon, what does it mean to be a disciple? Count the cost to it. What does it mean to be a son of God and walk in the ways that God is calling you to walk? Count the cost. Don't just do it because, like even today, as I'm challenging you guys towards doing things, don't just do things out of duty because it's the right thing to do. Because, again, doing the right thing with the wrong heart doesn't make it the right thing. It's still the wrong thing. The heart is important. It's got to start there. And we'll get into that here specifically in a minute. Luke 14, 28 and 29 says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Right? And so we understand this principle or this idea of that we should count the cost. Now, I'm going to tell you who is right and who is wrong. I'm going to give you the answer. I don't often offer that to you, but I'm going to there is a right answer here. You're both right. And so let me say why. Because there's one factor we haven't considered that will shift whether creating the female monster is the right thing to do or not. And it comes down again to this understanding and principle. When we think in the context of the relationship father to son, what is the son? What is the son created to do? What is the son created for? Let's think biblically for a second.
Be like his father.
The son is created to reflect his father. And so really, if we're answering the question, should Victor create another monster, it really kind of will now depend on if Victor if Victor stays the same, unrepentant, still prone to this, doesn't take responsibility for the creature, doesn't cultivate an attitude, a heart, a mindset of love, care, concern, engagement. And really, it starts with first, let's not talk about creature. Let's not talk about creating you a bride, let's first talk about our relationship and how I have failed you. Right? So if Victor remains unrepentant, then the obvious answer is no. No, he can't create something else. Why? Because what he will be creating is something that will mirror his unrepentant image. Now, if Victor has a change of heart, fully takes responsibility, understands the full weight of what he has done, and makes amends with his son, then and only at that point could you say that, no, this is then a good thing, because now what he will be passing on is, number one, the proper image to his daughter in this sense. And because he's investing, right, the appropriate and correct cultural context to his son, then what he will be able to provide for them is the safety net or cultural understanding of what it would mean then to be in companionship with one another. And in this light, the creatures don't have to go out into the world and just go things alone, right? That's what the monster is thinking, like, just leave me with her and we'll go and do our own thing. Well, again, that's the wrong answer too. The only way this works will be in the context of actual, genuine, cultured relationship. Ultimately, the only way that we can answer this clearly would be, does Victor have the heart of God? Can he truly understand the love of God? And the author doesn't provide us that as really as an option, right? And so because we know that Victor is unrepentant, the answer has to be no. We can't create something that will reflect the insecurity, inability, unrepentant heart of its creator. And that's a hard thing, because I think the real thing that we struggle with in this ethical dilemma is, again, don't you want to see the creature get something that can love him? And see, it's such a trick here that the author does. The author provides us this, what about if I had a wife? That would solve my problems. Well, yeah, in many ways, the wife could solve the problems. In many ways, it can compound the problem. Right? Marriage is not just all happy-clappy, everything goes well. It's a struggle. It's a difficulty. And when you don't have the context underneath you, and I want you guys to listen really intently to this, because outside of Andy and I, right, there's nobody in this room that is in this season of pursuing someone other than them as a suitor for their life. And so, but what is everyone currently doing? Cultivating a relationship with the Father. If the relationship and the reflection of the Father's heart is not being rooted deeply into your heart as sons in his house, then any relationship you have will be fractured. So we can look at it this way. If we're having difficulty with others, the place that we resolve the difficulty first is not with the other. It is being reconciled back to God. It is being reconciled to the Father. It's understanding how we have failed the Father. David talks about this in the Psalms, where he reflects upon his own sin, and he said, and he certainly hurt other people. He sinned against other people in a sense. But he reflects this way. He says, "To you alone, God, have I sinned." He puts this proper understanding that he must come back to a proper place of reflection of the Father. Now, ultimately, we read the story. We know that that's not the case, right? And so this is really kind of a fascinating, I think, study in just like, yeah, but that's not what happened, right? And Victor promises, I'm going to do this thing, and man, I got to tell you, as somebody who's experienced a father that doesn't keep their promises, and we probably all have had that dad. I mean, we probably all remember a time when maybe our dad didn't do the thing that we hoped he did, and he fell short of that. Okay? And I want you to consider this, not to tear apart dads, because we make mistakes, but to consider how that felt. Now, this is the only experience the creature ever had, is a dad not showing up. And yet you and I, what we have given to us is a Heavenly Father who keeps His promises. How often does God the Father keep His promises? Always. Always. And we need to anchor, listen, you guys, we need to anchor to that truth, because there's an enemy of our soul that is trying to attack the image of our Father, our Heavenly Father. And so Victor cannot achieve this, cannot attain it, cannot go there. He makes this promise and then he doesn't follow through, which causes then now really fully what it looks like is, right, the creature has now basically just, he's given over. I think at this point in the book, can we confidently say he's stopped being a creature? Right? We're beyond, again, actions have consequences. So I get it. The creature has not been treated very well by his father, but we're now into a trajectory. When he made that threat, if you don't, I'm gonna. It's a very childlike thing to do. Like this is a toddler, right? But he's at the point now where he's kind of went beyond just a creature, just poor thing, and we've kind of moved beyond considering the monster, because now what he is the monster doing, the demon doing. It is actively pursuing the destruction of not just Victor's life, but that has no regard for human life at all. In many ways, he's not really solely punishing Victor, is he? He's punishing every other person that stands in his way. And you can't, in a good conscience, say, at a certain point, you have to say, wow, you have given yourself over. It might have started as something that's innocent, out of woundedness and brokenness, but it has escalated to the point of great difficulty. To the point where we see now in, let's go to chapter 3, page 171, where Victor finally comes to the end of himself, in a sense. And it says this: I left the room.
What page? I'm sorry.
Page 171. I left the room, and locking the door, made a solemn vow in my own heart never to resume my labors. And so not merely just that to not create another being for the monster, the demon, but to cease from this kind of practice. And then, with trembling steps, I sought my own apartment. And this is some very profound what happens next. He says this: I was alone. All of our actions have consequences. What Victor sowed into the life of the monster was the feeling of being alone. What Victor is reaping is that same feeling of being all alone. Victor ultimately has no one to blame. This is the only course it could have taken. I was alone. None were near me to dissipate the gloom and relieve me from the sickening oppression of the most terrible reveries. You see, again, what we see highlighted so clearly for us is our absolute and utter need for relationship, for human connection, to belong to something, to belong to someone, to have a purpose that goes beyond the glory it may bring me, but a purpose that is rooted in a community. We must understand, at your guys' age in particular, that the opportunity for you all to grasp that your life is not your own, but it represents a culture that God has given you. And certainly that's reflected clearly here amongst his people. That your life here, in this room, in this moment, in time, is for the sake of the greater community. Now, God wants to bless you and grow you and mature you, and I think the Lord has placed very specific things on your heart that you like and don't like. He's made you unique, individual, personal, right? Intimate, but not for the sake of yourself. Certainly for his heart, but also to be shared with one another. And it's where we have to really understand, again, the only place that this relationship works here between man is when this relationship, us and the Father, is intact. As soon as we get out of alignment with the Father and his heart, God's authority, our identity as sons. God's authority as Father, our identity as Son. As soon as we walk out from under that, it fractures all relationships. You show me where there's a fractured relationship, I will show you where those people participating in that have missed the authority of God and missed their identity as sons. And so we see that, right, this consequence in Victor's life has left him pretty broken. In fact, we talked about his father a little bit, page 186. My father was enraptured on finding me freed from the vexations of a criminal charge, that I was again allowed to breathe the fresh atmosphere and permitted to return to my native country, right? Like he was released from the responsibility for an act he didn't commit, although he was responsible, really. I did not participate in these feelings, for to me, the walls of a dungeon or a palace were alike hateful. The cup of life was poisoned forever, and although the sun shone upon me, as upon the happy and gay of heart, I saw around me nothing but a dense and frightful darkness, penetrated by no light, but the glimmer of two eyes that glared upon me. And so we see that ultimately Victor's creation and his lack of engagement in relationship with his creation has come at the very heavy price of his own soul. The Bible says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world? That's what he was looking for. To gain the whole world, this knowledge, and yet to forfeit his soul. And this is where we will leave it this week to consider. What is the cost that you must count in your life currently? Because I can tell you, I promise you, you all have something in your life that you must consider the cost of it. Currently, right now, the way that the Lord is leading you, pulling you, adjuring you, admonishing you, to really grasp what it means to be sons is something that has to be considered thoughtfully, prayerfully, joyfully, willingly. It's not something to be assumed, not just because, well, my parents are doing it, so I should do it. It's not flippant like that, you guys. And this is why when we talk about willingness, it's so critical for us to become willing participants in the things of God. Because you will not stand before the Father in heaven someday and give an account of who your parents are. You will stand before a loving Father and give account for your own life and your own choices and your own responses. And so when you hear Brother Emmanuel, Brother Tim, myself, your parents, whomever, saying, you've got to get this, understand this, it is important. It is with the wisdom of many years behind us to say, don't miss this opportunity now. Now, listen, is this not what Victor inevitably comes to? This understanding, his life is gone from him. And yet, how do we begin the story? With Walton. And he begins to tell the whole story of all of these events. Why? To spare Walton from the same mistakes that he made. So we see a glimmer of hope. Not for Victor's sake. Even until the end, Victor seems unrepentant in many ways and will die. And will die miserably. But if he can just save one person through his story, one soul can be spared. Now, again, this is why I think the Lord highlighted for us this book. The Father desires to spare you from the ways of this world, the culture of this world, the deception of this world. And he has brought you here amongst people whose hearts are like-minded in this pursuit. But God has given you the choice here, young ones. In this book, she is telling us clearly, she's giving us this ethical dilemma. The story of Victor is a warning to us all about what kind of life do we want. He pursued knowledge and glory, and what he found was hell on earth. That it didn't matter whether I was in a prison or a palace. If you asked the author of Ecclesiastes, they would say it this way: vanity, vanity. Life is vanity. It's all meaningless. And yet you and I know that there's something unique that gives mankind real, true life. And it's not a mystery. It's not hidden from us. You want to know what gives you life? Sonship. The Father revealing himself in you, him creating you in his image, in his likeness, to reflect his purposes and his ways. But young ones, you have to choose it for yourself. Not merely because it's the right thing to do. And I will say it is the right thing to do, unequivocally. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. You would be foolish to reject what's been given you. You absolutely would be foolish. But God desires a heart that is willingly given over to him, not begrudgingly. God desires your obedience to be matured. And so you may start out begrudging, and that's okay. If it's begrudging and kind of like, I know I should, then allow the Lord to instruct your heart in a way that it becomes fully willing, fully obedient, fully mature. Again, listen, none of us here has arrived at that place fully. We are in process. But let's count the cost of what it would be like to not truly pursue the Father's heart with an understanding that he created you for a purpose, and that purpose starts with him and extends to one another. This coming week, we will read until the end of the book. And I want you to ask this question and answer it. Who, once all of it is done and written, who is the monster? Who is the monster? Is the monster Victor? Is the monster the monster? The creation? Is the monster both of them? Is the monster neither of them? Who is the monster? What is the final assessment? And then I want you to further consider, hopefully there's been many things, but in one sentence, I want you to encapsulate the lesson the Lord has taught you through this book. If you could say, if I ask this question, what is the one thing the Lord showed you? And again, you don't get to say, well, there's so many things. If you got 450 of them, you get to pick the best one, the one that stands out to you the most. What is the one thing the Lord has instructed in your heart? Because I believe the Lord wants to highlight something through this book that will be like an anchor of hope in your soul. something to really hold you sturdy when the waves and the difficulty of life crash against you. That is it. Thank you, guys.